Okay, Andrew. So, I mean, you're an artist, educator, and what I would call a committed leftist. Maybe you would say communist. I'm not sure what terminology you're using, but I mean, it seems clear to me that these roles of artist, educator, and activist are very much entwined in your activity. To what extent do you think these different roles are codependent and necessary to each other?
Well, I think it sort of happened. I kind of arrived at that at this position. I'd say that I do my best. I'd say if about commitment, um, like it's just something that I try with. So, and it really came about around about the 2008 crash when I was walking past the occupation at St Paul's, and at the time was involved in this thing called the Communist Gallery, because we felt that, well, I was working with a group of people because we thought that coming through the pipeline would be lots and lots of attacks on us after the crash. And also just being a little bit kind of pissed off with like the art world, and also particularly like the political, the art world that sort of sees itself as political, being like something that didn't seem to be very real. And I'm not. I hope it's coming across as more realistic, because it's more like actually just feeling, well, there's no place to do what I want to do. I
For
don't know
sure,
what
yeah.
you'd think about that.
Well, that's my experience. But just to give some context, so you're saying around the time of the economic crash, 2007, 2008. So yeah,
Yeah,
when you saw the Occupy, there was occupied kind of tent village outside St Paul's Cathedral in the city of London,
yeah,
and
yeah,
at that time you had this gallery going in Brixton Market, no, called
yeah.
the
Well,
Communist Gallery, and you're
yeah.
saying that, yeah.
What it was a kind of a disused shop, and I mean, I think in a lot of ways there were problems with it, um, and the problems were to do with you wanted something to be really political, but I wasn't really sure how to do that. How to connect with the real things that I was seeing going on around me. And then this occupation happened, due to this massive great crash. And then there are all sorts of problems there as well, because tried to put the Communist Gallery in the occupation called the Bank of Ideas. And they said, well, you're not allowed to call it the Communist Gallery because the communism is ideological. And
But how does that work? So you say it was a bank of ideas. So there was an open call for ideas, or
the Bank of Ideas was a squatted bank. It was like the old USB building in Sun Street, in the city of
where's
London.
that? Okay, yeah. And it was
And
squatted for how long?
uh, about 3 months, I think, because everything got it closed down. It got evicted, and I lost some stuff there, like banners and things like that. But I think one of the issues of it was because it was a kind of an anarchist-led initiative, which was great. I mean, thanks for them. But they had a problem with the word communist, whereas at that time I was starting to get interested to find out what it was that caused the economic crash, because there were these a lot of people were protesting around St Paul's, and some of them had worked in the finance industry.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was this banker who just said the debt is going to be trillions of pounds, and it's all getting sucked down this black hole like a vacuum cleaner. And I just thought, well, what the hell is this? So I put a call out to read Marx's Capital. I remember me and you read the first chapter, and I just thought I'd really wanted to read it in depth with people and to read it in this occupation And in the end, we ended up reading it as a small group in the Royal Festival Hall, because you can sit there without paying for anything in the cafe area now.
Mm-hmm. So basically, I mean, the economic crisis, it made you aware that something was not working systematically. You were already an artist. You had this initiative in Brixton Market where you had a studio as well that was called the Communist Gallery. And so you basically ended up connecting these things. The kind of the current situation at the time, you're kind of growing extremism. We shouldn't really call it extremism, but you're growing leftism, pushing towards the far left, and then your art somehow fitting in there. But I mean, I just want to kind of come in there because I know you will probably get to this soon. It's something that I've been working with, but art is somehow compromised, I feel, as a political activity. And you already hinted at it, that you got kind of demoralized by dealing with the officialized political art world that somehow seems contradictory. So, I mean, art, for one, is very middle class as a space. I know. I mean, if you're going to kind of art openings, I mean, the opening night of an art exhibition or into a museum on any day, you feel kind of an ambient that is not a working class ambient. It's something else that requires you maybe to know certain things or have certain behavioral traits that, if you don't have, you end up feeling somewhat uncomfortable. So there's that aspect. There's also obviously the financial links of the art world, the art world being driven by these kind of sales that are linked to investment. And the same people buying the big artworks for investment purposes that are investing in banks and in arms and in anything that would make a lot of money. So they were then being basically very much linked in with capitalism. So there are all these kind of different strands coming together. So I mean, how does one overcome this? Because it's something that I'm always kind of thinking of, and one of the reasons I ended up migrating more online in my practice rather than in the contemporary art world. But how do you see an art form that somehow responds to this and that makes art useful to the left, to the people as such?
Okay, so there's quite a lot in what you just said. I mean, I think that one of the first things is just to be really simple about it, so that basically art requires certain material things. So you require, a place to make the work, materials, and also because I think art is a very social thing. I mean, if you look at Walter Benjamin's The Author's Producer is a really good thing to read for people. But if you look at art as a social thing, the problem is that the art is not taking collectively control of the social culture where artwork can be shared. So you have that problem, and there is also, you mentioned like the middle class, and I'd call them like the petty bourgeois. And I think actually to see art's always in the interests, it's always placed in the interest of some class. So this thing of actually, because I have to say this, I hope it's okay, but I've worked in a school for many, many years in Bethnal Green. And I know how 100% art is so important for human, for people, human development, for kids, and just people in general. And we had an art gallery in the foyer of the school and everything. But that I'd have to say that having the gallery in the school really politicised me. And I think that it's very interesting you used the word extreme or radical, become radical, because I feel that actually it's more like becoming more down to earth. It's like becoming, look, we just want this work to be available for and to be part of everyone's life, people that are struggling, And also, if again, I mentioned that word struggling, yeah? So if you're struggling, you need a voice. Well, art's a voice. So if this voice is imprisoned in some kind of like white cube or like some kind of alternative space, say in Hackney, where only the same people go, it's not really giving everyone a voice. I think there's all kinds of reasons for that. I'm going to say something really extreme. Well, this isn't extreme, actually. So, like, I think with the alternative art world is one of the things that you have to do. Yeah, I'm gonna bring my friend Stan in here. Yeah. Well, what I want to do is I want to give you a parallel. I'm not actually Jesus Christ. My name is Stan. And what I want you to do is imagine a cube of shit covered with sugar. And it's hanging from a huge great hall. And underneath it, on the floor, are all these people looking at the cube of sugar. But they don't realise what it's got inside it. But they all want to get their teeth into it. But only a few people have got their teeth into it. And they're all looking at the cube and they're all hypnotised. And when you start to see this, it can be a trifle depressing.
Okay, I mean, what you just did there, I mean, I think you did something, and someone else appeared momentarily. But yeah, this is basically your puppet performance, no? That you do these performances to express social issues, to express problems with the art world. It's kind of a way of speaking. I mean, do you feel like you're speaking in a different persona or saying things you might not say, or does something somehow become easier when you...
Well, it becomes easier, I mean, there's quite a lot of these puppets. I could reach down and get some more later. But I think what happened is when my parents died, they lived in this council place, and we were told to get everything out in 2 weeks. And I went past this skip, and there was a banister in the skip, and I started carving it with a chisel, and a foot came out of it. And I think at that time I was just thinking about the way material things contain all these memories. And it's like if you haven't got money, your material circumstances are just really, really pushed around. And I mean, later on, you know, when we read the Marx, and you've got the commodity fetish, you know, where basically the labour of people that make the table is hidden, and it grows a grotesque brain and starts talking and dancing around. And at the point of kind of just thinking, well, there's no point in trying to kind of worry too much about trying to get some space to show your work and talk to people with it. I could just saw the heads in half and give them a jaw and make them talk on the street. And that's how the puppets kind of came about.
Yeah, I mean, but it makes. I mean, it is. I mean, for anyone who knows that part of Marx, it was Capital 1, Volume 1.
Yeah.
The dancing table. I mean, this is very powerful. But I suppose it's powerful because also you don't need to know that, because obviously not everyone has read Capital. But he expresses very clearly what Marx is saying, that you can take material and it kind of takes on a life of its own, and it takes on a life that overcomes or imposes upon human life. So you get this reversal of roles, that the human becomes the object. We become objectified or commodified. And I think this is something very important about art and art's role in the left movement, and something that Marx, to my mind, as far as I know, and I might be wrong, doesn't really get to, probably because he was so busy writing about economics, and then so this got taken up by people like Adorno, Benjamin, in the next century, or in our last century. But this, this thing that if the problem is humans, we're in a constant struggle to try and dominate the natural object, try and dominate nature around us, to try and strengthen ourselves, to try and evade death, so to speak. This often goes wrong because you try and control the object, and you end up controlling things so much that the controlling aspect controls humanity itself, such that even the people who are trying to dominate the natural object through finance, through science, end up being themselves dominated. There's no one who really controls capital. It's like a runaway train, to use kind of a cliche by now. But the process of art is one of finding a pact, trying to find a midway point with the object, which I think makes it crucially important for the left struggle. That maybe it's only by analogy, but at least there is this kind of like willingness to work with an object and to give and take with the object, at least during the process. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It kind of does, because I think that without wanting to sound conservative, well, I don't really care actually, that actually the process of, say, taking a piece of wood and carving it, it's like you're forming a different relationship with it. And I used to work on the tube as well. In those days, it had this thing called a railman, and you're supposed to sit in this box and watch people's passes as they came through the barrier, which it would be impossible for most human beings to do, because it was just like like an 8-hour shift. And in the box were all these carvings that people had carved into the shelf where you sit. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think things like doodles and making stuff is really, really important for people. And a way of, sailors they used to do that with the bones on the ships and things. I mean, I hope we're not going off.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, no, but this does. I mean, okay, then that people expressing their subjectivity or trying to claim their subjectivity by making stuff when they're under dehumanizing conditions or desubjectifying conditions, that is demonstrative of the fact that creativity is essential to subjectivity, or is one way in which we can express it. And one can't be a subject without creating, surely, because even the process of being a subject is an ongoing creation. But I just wanted to kind of reflect on that a bit more, because Marx says, because I'm reading now Communist Manifesto again. I mean, I read it decades ago now, the first time, with a reading group. We talked yesterday in similar circumstances to this, as in we talked online, which is the only way one can talk right now with the lockdown. But we talked about the Communist Manifesto, and Marx says that capitalism, it was a great leveler because it got rid of bourgeois trades, the guilds, the trades that came with the guilds, the crafts that came with them. And he doesn't really seem to any point say that's a shame. And he does say that we're losing the humanity. And I guess he implicitly suggests that when you lose these craft skills and you end up all becoming labourers, or more and more of you become labourers, that is dehumanising in itself. He doesn't make this strong link between the loss of artistic creativity and the commodification or alienation of labour. I'm just wondering, I mean, does that appear in Marx at all? Because, I mean, irrationally, if part of the process of capitalization, of making things capitalist, was a kind of destruction of the guilds and the crafts, then wouldn't the rolling out, the extension of craft skills to everybody have the opposite effect? And why isn't that ever really been a part of orthodox Marxism?
I think I think that Marx definitely talks about the effect of capitalism on us in I'm not quite sure what chapter it is in volume 1, where he's talking about the division of labour and the fact that it turns us in. I've got a drawing of that I can send to you. That it turns us into this kind of monstrosity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you might be glued to a computer chair. I'm sure many people have had that experience, and you're just, like you're just doing this repetitive action. And I think that what Marx is saying, he's also talking about this many-headed creature with like different eyes on it and hands, like a stonemason that's able to do one thing over here, do one thing over, which is the power of the collective. But obviously there's a price to be paid for that if you're just doing the same thing again and again.
Yeah,
and that's
for sure.
what capitalism harnessed. I think the possibility of philosophy, and I think art is philosophy, art is thinking with materials, yeah, is going to be more in a society where everybody can have some time to do this, yeah, and have some time to beyond like things that are maybe materially necessary for survival. And also I'd say that basically culture is also necessary for survival as well, but that's another conversation. But and there is one amazing bit in Capital where he's talking about work, and he says that work is it's a purposeful activity. Now, I'd have liked to have had a conversation about that, because I think that, yeah, when we're planting seeds, yeah, it's a purposeful activity because we want the seeds to grow, whatever, yeah. But when we're making art, I think it is like it's trying to discover what we're thinking, and we're using materials at the same thing. I think a great sadness in our education at the moment is this idea that everyone at every stage, the teacher and the students, is supposed to know what they're doing, rather than actually saying, well, everybody's supposed to know that what it is that they're exploring, and they may not know exactly where it's going to go. I think that's really important. And that space of art is really valuable, because I think it's also related to, for example, when I as you know, I work on my political activity at the moment is a lot going out with Focus E15 housing campaign in London. And we're out on the street, and we're often making artwork in the street.
Yeah, but just to, can you just give some context on that? The Focus E15 for the viewers.
Yeah, Focus E15, and we can put a link in underneath the blurb of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Focus E15 is a housing campaign started by young mothers who were struggling against being evicted from a hostel about 6.5 years ago now. And it kind of grew. It's based in Newham in London. And, we have like an organising strategy group, and we have public meetings. And I'll put a little infographic somewhere in this slideshow about that. Because I think that very much goes back to your first question, because it's like within the context of this organisation, the art is so important. Yeah, it's like art is a way of talking about things, and art's a way of putting maybe sometimes complex things. Like, we do this thing of like a slideshow about Marxist Capital, and with the drawings and images, you can put them on the table and you can talk to people around these things and talk about your own engagement. There's a slide there. This is a street performance where we're enacting surplus value. I did this with some revolutionary communist group in Catford, And what we're doing is we're creating commodities there, these cups of special cappuccinos. And he's creating value beyond the value of his wage and being exploited. And then we're talking to people who are watching around. And, you know, part of my practice as well is to make these masks. And I thought it was really interesting, one of your questions about how do you see yourself as an activist more than an artist? Because I found actually from being in these situations, like you can see the phone box in that slide has been used to write the description of the show on, is it forces you to be more creative with materials. Like it's a dialectical relation, and it's like it forces you to think of ways of making art with people, actually. And you have conversations on the street with people about real things, about the work, about what they're facing. I don't know if this is going into a bit of a ramble.
No.
I mean,
I'll get back to both of us. No, that makes sense. I mean, coming from what we were saying, I suppose we're dealing with. Well, I suppose what I was asking is if Marx identifies one of the things that led to capital, or one of the things concomitant with capital, being the destruction of craft-type labour, which involves skills and crafting objects. Would it not follow that the opposite of capital might involve more and more people having craft skills? But what you're doing here is you're showing us, you're expressing Marxist issues through art. So that kind of links into what I'm saying in a way. I mean, for the left, if the destruction of craft skills we could call art is a problem, then surely more art made in the right way might be part of the resolution. Which seems to be part of your practice. No, you're taking art onto the streets. You go every Saturday and talk to people on the streets of, is it Lambeth, Brixton? In Newham, South East London.
No, Newham is East London.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, probably
E15, yeah.
East London. Yeah. And the art is somehow part of this. No, I mean, you're using art because you somehow think this enters into the equation. You're taking art onto the streets. I mean, going back right to the first question, I mean, for you, these roles somehow are crossing over. You're strongly seeing some link between art and the movement as such, because a lot of people will say, oh, bloody hell, art, this is a load of, bourgeois nonsense. Maybe that's not even accurate statement, but I mean, they're associated with this kind of wishy-washy mentality, also with it, being all about money, it being highly exclusive. And so they tend to kind of like exclude art from activist exploits unless it's like a banner with a very clear, quite aggressive, direct statement. But otherwise, as art, as we understand it, that tends to be kind of dismissed. But you're clearly not dismissing it. So, I mean, so when do you find that in your activist exploits, do you find people saying, oh, bloody hell, art? Because I found it a lot with anarchists who are really like, this is all shit,
I think that is a really, really important question, because I think what I have found is people might think, oh, this is just something you do. And with the E15 people, I find that they're really, really aware, and they're very, very supportive of what I do. And I perform, some of the things I've done with people is performing puppet shows. They've written puppet shows with me and stuff, but I have found with some people who are on the left, and I think this is probably more a question of, really interestingly, I find the same things going on in the normal education system, where art's seen as, oh, it's useful to kind of wheel out if you want to decorate the foyer of the school or something. And I think that on the left, sometimes, oh, we need a banner, like, yeah, let's do this and that. But I think that is something to do with maybe Northern Europe, because I've seen, like I put that poster for Group Yorum, the Turkish band that have been forbidden to, because their art's so important that the states actually put them in prison. God almighty. So, and they're having to go on hunger strike, and unfortunately, one of the members, Helen Borak, has died. I mean, I can't conceive of that, because it will be like people saying to us, no, you can't go out on the street, you can't do art, you can't use it. Because what's important here is that this is a potential for formation of voice. Because when you're doing working with colour and imagery and stuff, it's on different layers. And Marx does this. You might read a lot of things in Marx and forget, but you're never going to forget a commodity is congealed labour, because it's a poetic art image. And I'm sorry if I'm offending any Marxists. I'm saying there is a lot of poetry in Marx. You're never going to forget capital is dead labour. And like a vampire, it lives on living labour, and it lives the more it sucks. Once you've read that, you're not going to forget that. So
yeah,
I think
remember the golden egg as well. The goose laying golden eggs. This is capital. This is the creation of value.
And you put Donald Trump on the drawing. This golden egg, like, for example, that's the way they teach us about capitalism. So they say, you've got these wealth creators in Canary Wharf, yeah? And they're up there doing their stuff and they're creating wealth. And it's almost like, you could imagine all these guys up there, but instead of, that's a bit of an obscene image, but they're laying these kind of golden eggs, yeah? Well, we know that's not true. That basically on the end of their calculations, with these investment, more money's coming in. How does that happen? Nobody tells you that. Nobody. And it's like, I might be stupid, but when I read Marx and you get to the chapter 6 and he's talking about surplus value, that basically, just imagine you've got people, let's just take a cappuccino bar, and they start making cappuccinos, and by about 11 o'clock, they've made 200 cappuccinos. They've been there since 6 o'clock. That's easily covered the value of their wage. But they can't go home. They carry on making more cappuccinos until 6 o'clock. And this is how capitalism works, but nobody tells you. And we could, it's so easy. Well, you can find ways.
I mean, that is kind of a revelation when you read it, even if it should be obvious. And a lot of Marx has kind of like filtered to, I won't say the street level, because not everybody is kind of naturally understanding Marx, but there's some level of osmosis that we understand the principles, at least of class struggle. But this thing of like, where does the extra value come from? When you read Marx, you realise, oh, of course, it comes from labour value. There's this being appropriated by someone else. I mean, that is, I think, very useful to learn and to go through that by reading Marx. But I think also counterintuitive to many people, because the money does appear to be made from nowhere through kind of the betting on and selling of debt and things. Mm-hmm. But it's still, I don't know, if you trace, I don't know to what extent there is money circulating that literally is just invented. I'm not sure. I suppose the thing is that when the economy expands to such an extent with false money, eventually it's going to have to contract back to what it's really worth, and that's going to be the labour value inherent in the economy. You can't expand endlessly away from the actual labour value, no?
Yeah, I think Janaris Banerjee, Indian Marxist academic, is we could put a link to that, because that's quite interesting in regards to that, because he talks about this fictitious value of capital. Now, if you think about the scale of for a start, most manufacturing is taking outside of imperialist countries like the UK, but the investments are just going to these places, yeah? But the scale of a business, to set up a business, say, for example, to make a factory making cars, you're not going to have that amount of capital, are you, to start with? So there has to be somewhere where you can borrow it, and that'll be the banks. And then they'll be speculating on the fact that this is going to make all this money in the future, yeah? And the type of capital which is quite easy to understand, I think, is productive capital, where you've got you can see it. So someone's making something, and in the day they make more of it than the value of their wage. But you can't just make something for nothing. You need tools. So fictitious capital. If you were just to abolish fictitious capital, modern capitalism would just crash. It would just stop. But if that fictitious capital is not linked to the creation of real value, then you get an almighty crash.
Yeah.
You know, so that happened in 2008. And one of the things is Engels and Marx, you know, they were talking about capitalism is always getting fits of giddiness when it tries to leave out the production process. And I think, I don't know if that answers your question.
Exactly. Yeah, well, it does. Yeah, it is exactly what I was kind of wondering. Yeah. So, I mean, basically you get so far from the labour value that eventually somebody turns around and questions that value, and then it all crashes. Or not if enough people lose confidence in the fictitious value, it crashes back to its pure labour value, to the objects that exist and then the labour that exists.
Yeah, and I think that they will try and circumvent the production process. Like there was the Enron thing, and there's a film about Enron, and they had this. I can't remember what the name of the last company was, so I'm going to make it up. But it's not far from the truth. It was a big chalkboard, and it had all these companies where the investments were going. Yeah, it was about kind of 20 companies, and the last company was called something like the UYA company. That was the last one where the investments were kind of where it was supposed to be going into this productive investment. And then they worked out what that was when they were investigating them, and they called it the Up Your Arse Company.
Oh yeah.
In other words, it was just going around. I mean, that's quite a good film, that Enron film, because it's called The Smartest Guy in the Room.
But
that's a good. Yeah. So
they're just basically playing with fictitious money and finding new equations and ways to make it go round and round, though. And the people doing it, they're basically having a laugh at everyone. But people who say that there is, the value can create itself. I mean, not in any sense that can benefit all of society. The thing is that kind of value is only going to benefit very few people,
and for a period of time.
But it's unfortunately so abstract that it's quite difficult. I suppose it's what you're trying to do through your art, but to try and kind of convey this to most people, that basically this is all a con that's only going to benefit very few people, and periodically it's going to crash massively and everyone else is going to be in trouble. I mean, I wonder why people aren't more convinced to take action against that. I suppose it's because people are so busy just trying to pay their rent or mortgage or whatever.
Well, that's a big question, because then you kind of come straight back to what you were talking about with the grassroots movement. And there's organisations like that have kind of been successful in Latin America. So, for example, I'm not an expert, but say the movements, say, for example, in Venezuela, were associated with housing on the ground, like doing things on the ground. And I think one of the problems in the UK has been that people don't think that they can address their basic problems, like why is that estate over there with 400 flats, like the Carpenter's estate, empty, when there are people sleeping on the streets, when there's people being put in places that the council themselves has described as being like a prison, and these people, like the children and that, they're still there like a year and a half later. Why is that? And we're all told, no, what you've got to do is you've got to campaign for the Labour Party. And then people say, yeah, but hang on a minute, this is a Labour council. And, you know, so what happens is, and I'm not wishing to disrespect anybody, but it's like the people that are more privileged, like, for example, I don't know, like, say some of the people you might know that are working in around universities, or, and I'm not saying they're privileged massively, but they kind of don't get it that people's experience on the ground is of being seriously attacked. And now really what we should be doing with each other is making common causes where we're attacked and not trusting somebody to speak for us. We could twist their arm. I'm all for twisting people's arms. I think, you know, you do need to do that. But you can't twist someone's arm on your own. We need to be together. You know?
It's like, well, the thing is, academia is a very closed space, and the people who have permanent jobs, the contracts, they're not going to be persuaded to give way easily, and for that reason, you know, they get to just play kind of obscure games with Marx and with Adorno, with all these thinkers. They get to kind of argue about them. They argue about them without ever actually having to implement them. They get just caught up in the minute detail without having to apply it. And you really get the feeling that these people, they would be terrified if they had to speak to a really working class person, you know, or an immigrant who was in difficulty. Their whole thing is trying to just keep clean and away from this stuff. I mean, you can't say everyone, but, you know, when people have quite safe jobs, and where speaking out of turn could lead them to lose their position, then you kind of see how it happens. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult because then one can easily get into character assassinations, and we're not even going to talk.
No, I don't want to do that.
We're not going to talk about people specifically, but I mean, even in the broader sense of the middle class, they act like this. You know, bourgeois academics, they act like that. It's not really going to help us. So I think it's more or less to look at why they feel they can't talk, and that's perhaps a material condition as well.
I think it is. I mean, Lenin talks about this in the Split in Socialism, and also there's a great book about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, parasitic capitalism. And basically what happens is you get these splits. I think that actually, to be honest with you, although I understand why people like Pierre Bourdieu and that, and people talk about what's his face, like social class prejudice, yeah, it's real, yeah. Don't get me wrong, but I think that it's like turning class into an identity politics. It kind of doesn't help us, yeah. It doesn't help us in the long term. I kind of struggle with this because I feel that it's like the way the material class structure determines so much what we're allowed to have access to. Like you just explained, for example, going into an art gallery and feeling out of place. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, because I think that the art gallery is just a bricks and mortar box, but the activity of art belongs to human beings. And I want to pull that out of I would love to pull that out of the bowels, out of the intestines, and give that I think that's our inheritance. That's a human inheritance, and it's part of our language, and it's part of our power.
But I think
And
I
I
think
think,
that what you're talking about, though, is in a way making it less bourgeois, making it less an object of investment, an object that has to have some special value. That you're making it immediate in some sense. I would say that a working class culture is more immediate, and it's more about immediate living. I mean, okay, I don't think it's entirely helpful either, but I don't think it's possible to completely reduce this to economics, because I think that the economics are functioning partly because of bourgeois values and not vice versa, not completely vice versa. But I just want to get back to culture, to art, and how art can help the left. But I want to kind of move on to online creative production, because it's something I've been working with a lot the last couple of years, partly because I saw the art world as too closed as a space, and I find online culture actually kind of closer to the avant-garde dream of a kind of art for everyone than the art world is. I mean, it's not ideal, and a lot of what gets produced online in terms of memes, videos, is kind of either banal or just silly or stupid or even damaging in some way. But then some of it is really positive. So, at least I think that the fact that anyone can produce, and really most people can put stuff out online in the Western world and a number of other developing and developed countries. So, I think this is a really interesting space for getting messages across, but it's another space that gets kind of attacked by some leftists, because they say, well, hang on, how's this going to work? Online protest, online kind of consciousness formation. There's a feeling that this stuff has to be happening in real life. I don't know what you think about that, if you see any role for online culture.
yeah, I mean, because we're all forced into it now with this lockdown thing, and it's quite interesting because we had a street stall virtually on Saturday, which I'd like you to join next Saturday, actually. But there's pluses to that in the sense that people could take part that weren't able to come physically on the street. But I think that it's not one or the other. It's how do they link? It's how do, like, if you're doing something to do with using the internet, how it could link to a real action. And maybe this is like what we were talking about earlier. This is all part of us forming this culture that we need.
Well, we're talking now online. Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of convinced of online culture as a means of expressing things. I mean, how you then take that and apply it at a street level is another issue. And of course, now we can't really go outside. I mean, we're going to be presumably going outside again in the next months at some point. But I would say in the meantime, as we can raise consciousness only online, that it's worth kind of looking at the way things are happening around the coronavirus and pointing out where capitalism is kind of making things unequal. How the reaction to coronavirus is being affected by capitalism, such that it's not perhaps as effective as it could be, coming from the government in the UK, Italy, US, etc. And of course, not everyone is going through this in the same way. There's this idea that we're all in it together. Well, we kind of are, but I think it's very different if you have like a huge house and a swimming pool, or several houses, and servants and endless money. You're going to feel this differently to the likes of us or people who have much less than us. So that point could be used to raise consciousness. But if consciousness is raised to such a point and then suddenly we're all allowed out, then maybe it's possible that you can bring people onto the streets based on what has been expressed to them online. But I think it's worth also just visiting why you need that real life element. And I think it's very practical in the sense that one cannot really have a movement which is going to change the conditions of the economy unless you have really a lot of people expressing their how can you say, their acquiescence, their agreement with this movement, because you're going to have to convince the government that it can no longer stand behind the army and the police. You see what I mean? So you're going to have enough people to make them realize that it's time to change. And you're going to have to see those people on the streets, right? So the online's not good enough. It's like, it's a military term. It's almost a military term, probably is a military term, but you need feet on the ground, not because you want necessarily a fight, but you need to impress upon them that these people are with the left-wing cause. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, this is, the online stuff is part of the education, agitate, organise. So it's like, what is it to organise? Is to build agency, it's to build power. And obviously you need to know stuff, yeah? And the online is very, very good to inform us. And it's very good to meet people maybe we wouldn't meet, So we've got a meeting next Saturday, and we'll be talking to some people in India.
Yeah, I'll try. I don't know if that's the one you mentioned earlier, but I'll try and come to that.
It would be really great.
I actually have a reading group, this Communist Manifesto reading group, but that stops. Actually, on Saturday I have to do that. But we do the second half of the book then. Then it turns into a Dialectic of Enlightenment reading group, if you have time.
Wow, sounds great.
And the kind of the interesting aspect or novel aspect is that each chapter the participants read, they react with an artwork or a meme or something, and we discuss that. So if you have time, anyway, that's going to be happening. But yeah, one can meet people online and they can agitate and educate. I suppose is what you're saying. And
it's the action.
Yeah. Like, oh, fuck's sake, you keep crossing over each other. Fuck it. So what was that? And online, you can cross over each other.
Yeah. I could do that in real life and all.
That's true, yeah. So that's all going to get messy now. What's the last thing I was saying? And then what you were saying? Online, India. And I said, we have this thing that I'm doing. And you said, yeah, okay, interesting. And then, okay, you can carry on. Yeah, talk about your stuff again. You can say, yeah, it's whatever you want to say, but you can say, yes, it is a way of organising and it is useful somehow.
Well, it's useful, but I think that, let's look at it like this. It's like one of the things that in some communist group, they say like organise, like, or some people might say, look, don't worry about the voting stuff, you got to organise. But people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So the question that we're asking is very simply, I think, is, well, how does this fit into that? Because it's a new, it's like, you wouldn't be around, say, for example, in the English Revolution in the 1600s saying, oh, we're not going to use the printing press. You can't do that.
Well, then you wouldn't. Somebody might have said that because it was newish.
They might have done.
And it wouldn't have done them any good.
No. Yeah. And it's the same. So it's like we need all different generations. We need all different types of skills. And, like, I tell you what, like the way that that Marx, he talks about this thing that capitalism harnessed, which is cooperation, where you get all people in the same space doing these different things. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we need to be doing that. So, but we also...
there are examples like the Sanders movement and the Momentum Corbyn movement, them using what's called dispersed organisation, which actually is a term made within the Sanders movement, which means you would have like an online forum and you would have different sections like the phone banking section, the canvassing section, the people who are going to make videos online, the people who are going to make memes, and they'd all be coordinated. But you'd get a certain point in the campaign when you'd say, can everybody, because we're really at a crucial point, make a phone call today, do some street canvassing and make a meme, share it on Twitter, Facebook. So you end up somehow combining the street level with the internet levels. I think this is how it would work, only it's not, if you're looking for electoral victory, which is not really what you're talking about normally, it hasn't delivered yet. It hasn't delivered for Corbyn, it hasn't delivered for the Sanders movement. But the thing is, there's a lot of people in the grassroots, or shall I say in the mass movement behind Corbyn and Sanders, that see what's happening more as a movement than as an electoral campaign, that they're not going to win, but it's the beginning of something bigger. I think if you really went around London, or if you meet people online, you might find some decent people in Momentum and Labour and in the Corbyn movement,
Well, I wouldn't rule it out.
in the Sanders movement in the US. But if it's going to become a movement, it does have to be organised to some extent online. And I think that gives a benefit that you could have forums that weren't maybe linked to Labour and to Sanders. Maybe they could have some of the same people, but they could be maybe more addressing the raising of a class consciousness in general. And you could say, right, okay, we've got some people in America, we've got some people in the UK. Andrew, your people in the UK, you could like do some street happenings on Sunday, simultaneous to some people in New York doing some happenings, and somebody else in Berlin could be making some memes, but we're all focusing on the same thing. Like we're all focusing on raising class consciousness through the coronavirus, for example. I mean, you could do that on a huge scale if you had many people in the same forum. You see what I mean? An organizational forum. So maybe that is how it could work.
I mean, I could kind of illustrate this, yeah? So if I was to introduce Stuart, so I'm going to introduce Stuart here. So this here is Stuart Wood. Can you see him?
Yeah, hello, Stuart. Hi.
Hello, right. Now, okay, that's all well and good, but if someone's trying to drag me out of my house, and that happened to an 84-year-old man in Brixton by a Lambeth Labour Council, and you're telling me that I've got to vote for these fuckers, I'm not going to be too happy about it. But if you're coming down helping me out and stopping what happened to me, where they pulled me out of my house and broke my pelvis, and I hope this isn't disrespectful because this actually really happened to somebody, then I'll take you seriously. I would. But the thing is, it's like that when we're talking about the ground, it has to be with what's happening to people on the ground. I hope I wasn't meaning to belittle anything.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
And I don't know how to say this. It's kind of like, it's like what I like about the Focus E15 and like other groups that I've worked with like that, is that the priority is the people. And not only is the priority the people, it's the priority of the people speaking for themselves. I think one thing I would like to emphasise is that, like just say recently, like thinking about the word organisation, I'll send you that infographic about that, is that we have to be prepared to do what you're doing, like, which is to kind of say, well, what is the use for this? How can we fit these things together? How can this work together? How can this produce agency? And I think to work collectively and ask those questions and actually try and apply them. So I think the important thing is actually to seek out groups where you can work with people and offer what you can use. And it will change what you can do. It would change if you as a writer were to work with a group, say, struggling for housing, it would change what you would do. It changes your work. And that should be a really exciting thing.
Yeah, I think for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different issues there about how one works with people who maybe don't normally make art or see it in quite the same way. You know, and this has been addressed by many initiatives. This is one of the hardest things: is overcoming the initial obstacle, not seeing people as a curiosity. You know, which is something you're involved in, and I know you do it very well. But overcoming this on any large scale level, basically, effectively getting the middle class speaking to the working class, even though I'd self-define as working class, but I'm not in the difficulty that many people are, and have had the experience of an education. Getting people from a cultural background, or working in cultural fields, speaking to the working classes on any large scale is very difficult, because I think it is a kind of inoculation that people in the arts are trying to avoid participating in real life as such. So, we face that obstacle, but I think we have to speak about it another time, because we need to wrap this up.
Yeah, just to say, there's just one thing I have to add.
Yeah,
that my experience is that, like, people are just people, and that the people that I have the privilege to work, to struggle with, they're all interested in art. They're all interested in this stuff. They've all had imagination. Everyone has an imagination. And we could be talking about spiritualism or something. And I've worked as a guard on a train, and we used to talk about philosophy, like on the train where you have to stay in the depot at night and stuff. So basically, I just really, really want to say that the need for art and for imagination and creative expression is just so inside people.
Well, that is true. I totally agree with that. I don't in any sense mean there's people who aren't interested in art. I suppose my experience is one of being around the contemporary art world, and people in the contemporary art world sort of only associating with other people in the contemporary art world, meaning the officialized kind of art world that operates around certain art fairs and certain in magazines.
Oh, we've got to get rid of them.
Well, exactly. I think you're completely right, but I think this goes right back to the beginning of the conversation, so it would be a good place to wrap up.
My name is Stan, and I'm 75 years old, and I've worked all my life doing jobs that I didn't really want to do. But I've always been doing poetry of one kind or another. As you can see here, I've got a little pencil. And I love to do drawing. So anyway, I'll say goodbye.
Okay, thank you, Stan. Thank you, Andrew Cooper, and speak soon.